Order for September 6th, 2023 for the Board of County Commissioners. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we now have time for citizen input. Carl Shoemaker.
Thank you. I understand one of the issues is allowing RVs to be designated as homes on property in the county. I'm for this because in Larkspur neighborhood, I frequently see like RVs and pickup trucks with trailers behind them, or even came across a camper one time with a person in it that had probably been sleeping overnight, and they just probably just come into the area to look for work. And if they have a stable place to live, they can work in the community and contribute to the community. And that's really all I wanted to say about that. So I think it would be a good idea if you voted yes on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shoemaker, for those comments.
And that item will be at 10 a.m. in case you want to stick around and hear the details.
Anyone else, Brenda?
I don't have any other signups.
Okay, all right. Eric, are there any raised hands on? No raised hands. Okay, all right. I believe that's our only one then this morning. Thank you for joining us today. We have our consent agenda.
Move approval of the consent agenda.
And I will second that. Any further discussion? Commissioner Chang?
Yes.
And I vote yes also. All right, first item number 7 on our agenda. The contract with the Bend Schools. Would you like to introduce yourself, Jessica?
Thank you. Jessica Jacks, Prevention and Health Promotion Program Manager with Deschutes County Health Services. And I am here for 2 items, and I thought I might start off with just kind of a overview because they're both so related. Some background on school-based health centers. A school-based health center is a clinic that's in a school. It's either in the school or on school grounds. And these clinics provide medical care, behavioral health care, bringing those practitioners very close to students so that students can access them easily, students and families can access easily, and minimize the time that they are out of school. In some places in Oregon, there's even dental care provided for students. Common services are routine physicals, sick visits, minor injury treatment, immunizations, potentially prevention or treatment of alcohol and other drug issues, and mental health counseling. In Deschutes County, our health services collaborates to run 7 school-based health centers, 6 of which are in Deschutes County, 1 of which is in Gilchrist. And we do this in partnership with a medical sponsor and the school district that the health center is placed. According to a 2023 school-based health center report by Oregon, there are 81 of these centers across Oregon. And in general, 55% of the services are for primary care, 41% are for behavioral health care, and 1% for dental. Why is this such a great thing? And I think similarly, as I mentioned earlier, bringing these practitioners, these services in close proximity to our students and families is beneficial for their health and well-being. And we've also seen a study conducted in Oregon that found youth at school-based health centers where behavioral health services were accessed 12% were less likely to report a depressive episode, 16% less likely to report suicidal ideation, and 18% less likely to report a suicide. So I want to leave you before I make my asks with a success story that was shared to me by our behavioral health staff. During a regularly scheduled family therapy session, a youth became triggered and dysregulated and resulted in some damage to the therapy office. Because of our staff training and safety, as well as the whole team, the whole school-based health center's response in collaboration with law enforcement, they were able to ensure safety for the student, their family, for the other patients in that setting, and to successfully de-escalate that student. Later in that day, the clinician that conducted the outreach, conducted the therapy session, reached out to the family to check on the student. And they were also successfully able to regulate at home. The student texted an apology and sent it to their school-based health center therapist, asking if they could try another in-person session. In so doing, the clinician and the family decided, along with the student, that the next session would be best at the student's playground. So they had a walk and talk and engaged in that session at the playground. We're very happy to report that the student is successfully attending school and that they are currently thriving. The youth and the family got to experience a highly positive, corrective, emotional experience, which has helped them to change the narrative from I'm a bad kid to I'm a great kid that bad stuff happened to. And I hope that all of our kids can feel that. It's examples like that allow our work to be more impactful, more effective, more intimate with students' families, being in places where they are. So the first ask today is to seek your approval for a contract with Ben Lapine Schools and Mosaic Community Health for a school-based health center at Bend High. This particular center has been running since 2015. And the total contract amount is $164,000. It is over the course of the 23-25 biennium. So if we break that down, that's $80,000 for behavioral health services, $84,000 for medical. And as you can imagine, that is a very small number for the services that are given. Any questions on that first ask?
So Jessica, we provide, the county provides behavioral health clinicians to work at these school-based health centers. Is this, so these dollars are, do these dollar amounts represent that as an in-kind contribution, or are that's cash that we direct into this partnership beyond providing behavioral health services?
Correct. It's resources that are passed through from the state through us to the medical sponsor, in this case, Mosaic Community Health, in which they are also contributing to behavioral health services on their end. They're providing behavioral health consultation, where our staff are providing behavioral health therapy. And so it is in addition.
Right.
To what
And so the origin of the funds that we are contributing, we are talking about contributing are state dollars that we're passing through.
correct.
Okay. It's helpful to understand. Thank you.
So Jessica, is this program at the school daily?
It is, so each school-based health center has different hours, and I don't have them memorized. I want to say that Bend is potentially like Tuesday through Friday. And so it's not every day, but it's most days.
Is it all day long then?
Yes. Yes.
So it's like an 8 to 5 or something along that line?
Oh, yes, I think there's some deviation from that, but yes. Full day services, and I could get back to you with the specific hours. They often change, and so we don't have them in the contract because as clinicians rotate or some unique services are provided, the hours can fluctuate. So the promotion of that gets interesting.
All right.
Could you were sharing some of the impacts, about reduced depression, rates of depression, suicidal ideation, et cetera, for schools that have school-based health centers. Could you repeat those percentages for me?
Sure.
I got the gist of it, but I didn't get the numbers, and they were significant.
Yes, you bet. And there is I don't have the citation with me, but I could send that to you just for reference. It was a study that was conducted in Oregon, and the percentages are 12% less likely to report a depressive episode, 16% less likely to report suicidal ideation, and 18% less likely to report a suicide attempt.
That's pretty significant.
But when you say 81 centers throughout the state, are we talking 81 high schools or 81 school districts? I mean, I'm just wondering how significant this program really is.
Yeah, so there are 81 centers. They may not be all at high school. So for example, we have one in an elementary school, but so there are 81 school sites.
81 school sites for the entire state.
Yes.
So,
we have 6 or 7 of them.
right.
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 It seems like we should have more in the state.
Yeah.
No, really. This
No,
is
I
81 with what has happened to children of the last couple of years, the lack, they haven't been in school. This test scores are, we're really, our graduation is at the bottom of the nation. And I would really love to see more than 81 centers. Maybe the governor will be listening and we can improve that.
I think a lot of it does depend on leadership within the community. And this is one of those examples of where our community placing a priority on kids and their health and their mental health and doing something about that, forming these partnerships allows us to capture some of these state dollars that are available. So if we want other communities to follow suit, it may be more in their court than the governor's. And it's also just a testament to how proactive our community is and the leadership on health services for kids that's here. And I think that's really, I would also like to see more around the state, but it makes me proud and glad that our community has made these 6 or 7 happen for us.
It's really tremendous, and kudos out to our partners, the school districts, and our community, Mosaic Community Health and Lapine Community Health Center. They put in so much effort to make this happen. Every site is a little bit nuanced. Bend and Mountain View, the school district owns the property, so you can just imagine the amount of orchestration in order to operate is pretty significant, and the contribution by all of us is immense.
So you mentioned the one in Gilchrist. I know that with the Central Oregon Health Council, Gilchrist is part of the region. Are there schools in Jefferson or Kirk County that are included?
Mosaic Community Health, I do happen to know, operates the one in Jefferson County and one in Crook County.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Is there a motion?
Yes, I'll move approval of board signature of document number 2023-563, a contract with Ben Lapine Schools and Mosaic Community Health for a school-based health center at Bend High.
I'll second the motion. Any further discussion? Commissioner Chang?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So thank you very much, Jessica, for that one. Now, if we can go on to item number 8.
Great. So very similar, but this instance, we're seeking your approval for a contract with Ben Lapine Schools and Mosaic Community Health for a school-based health center at Mountain View High School. And there's a little nuance to this one in that Mountain View, this is will be its first year. It opened last May, so at the very tail end of the school year, but was fully functioning. We even had a state site review that we passed, and we're looking forward to launching more fully in this school year, which starts today. This particular contract, actually, let me back up and say that the Mountain View High School school-based health center is actually a school-based health center move. Ensworth Elementary used to have a school-based health center, and through a couple of years of conversation and needing to relocate that particular center, Mountain View High School was selected as the site to relocate. So we no longer have one at Ensworth Elementary. So I just wanted to clarify that piece.
And about what's the distance between Ensworth and Mountain View?
It is a long walk for an elementary student. You wouldn't want them to do on their own. So it is. So it's. I actually would have to get back to you on that.
Yeah.
It is a big.
I'm trying to
bit of a-
visualize it, but it's not far. But yeah, for a second grader or somebody, that would be a long way. But and do we anticipate that it's still accessible enough that kids from Ensworth and other surrounding schools will be able to utilize this location?
That is the hope, and it really is. I should underscore that all students can go to any school-based health center site and receive services. Of course, for an elementary school student, that would be, the logistics are a little bit more there. So there has been some communication with families, and this has been a transition that didn't happen overnight. So there was a lot of communication that occurred.
And was there a state funding allocation or a federal funding allocation that allowed the move to happen? I remember there being, I vaguely remember something about a chunk of special funds.
Yes, so I really hats off to Mosaic Community Health, who led a fundraising campaign in order to build the modular. We actually had originally wanted to build, what do you call it? Brick and mortar? Is that when you actually dig into the ground?
Yeah.
But as you're aware, construction costs changed kind of overnight in a span of time, and that became financially unreasonable. And so we instead went with a modular, but Mosaic Community Health did a significant amount of fundraising. That was a combination of grants and local resources. We were able, Deschutes County, to contribute to some of the dollars that were unspent on Ensworth and reallocate them with OHA's approval toward the build of that modular site.
Again, great partnerships.
So do you know how many dollars we then reallocated for this project?
I'd have to get back to you on that to be sure. I want to say it was potentially around 80,000, but I need to double check my numbers.
Okay, 80,000. Thank you. Sounds good. Any other questions?
No.
Is there a motion?
Move approval of board signature of document number 2023-566, a contract with Ben Lapine School District and Mosaic Community Health for the school-based health center at Mountain View High.
And I'll second the motion. Any further discussion?
No.
Commissioner Chang?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Thank you so much, Jessica. Thanks for joining us this morning. We now have a presentation for needs assessment with our broadband report. Is anyone? Yes, there they are. Thank you so much, Tanya. Okay.
Yeah, you probably want Shelby to be here. Right?
Yes.
Could I just take a moment to mention to Jessica that at the Public Health Advisory Board meeting yesterday, Matt Christensen gave a really interesting presentation on drug overdoses and drug overdose deaths in Oregon, across Oregon, that provided some really interesting context for Deschutes County. And one of the key things that popped out was basically there's been an incredibly dramatic, we've had a dramatic increase in drug overdose deaths in Deschutes County, but nothing like what's being seen in like some of the big hot spots in southwestern Oregon and Multnomah County and some other places. And I thought the presentation just really was very complimentary to what Janice and yourself and Devi presented the other day, and so I just want to make sure that you guys knew that was that package of information had been put together, and I'm sure it would be very informative to check out from a prevention perspective. Yeah.
Digging into that.
Yeah, and it was, what he acknowledged as a limitation of his presentation was, well, I can tell you what's happening. I can't tell you what the appropriate interruptions and interventions are. I said, oh, well, we just heard a bunch about that from Janice and Jessica and Devi. So, yeah.
Thank you.
But then the other side of the story is what Rick Tolefin told me a couple of months ago at Health Council, that 7 of their patients overdosed and died in 3 months this year. 7 of their patients, and normally they lose 1 patient a year. The dangers of fentanyl are, you can't over exaggerate how dangerous it is for our community. So just want people to be aware that you really have to think twice.
It might be interesting to have Matt Christensen give that same presentation here. I mean, he showed, yes, in a couple of years, our overdose deaths in Deschutes County went from 6 to 11, but that's nothing like a county that went from 16 to 84. Small counties in some cases, smaller than us. So the problems are really it sort of seems like we get spillover, and it may get much worse in the future here, if we trend behind some of these other counties, and that's something to both be aware of and also to work against.
Thank you. All right. Hi, Shelby.
Hi, good morning. Good morning. So Tanya Mahood, IT Director and CTO at Deschutes County. And here to introduce Shelby Knight from COIC. And online we have our contractor consultants, Greg Loudman from Magellan, and some other folks from COIC.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. Thank you, commissioners. We're really looking forward to presenting the findings of this report to you all. This is something we've been working on in partnership with Tanya and our broadband action team. as well as our consultants at Magellan for just over a year. So really excited to share with you what we've learned and, hopefully talk a little bit about what's next for this process. First, again, just want to acknowledge everyone's hard work on this over the past year. So again, our consultants at Magellan who have really done a bulk of this work, as well as our broadband action team. So that's representatives from local government, education, the health sector, business, et cetera, who have really been helping steer this process. And then my colleagues who are online, Scott Aycock and Sienna Fitzpatrick, who really also put in a lot of work and time into this project. So before I pass it off to Greg to dive into the details, just wanted to share a little bit of background about why we're doing this work and how this project kind of came about to refresh folks' memories. So, reliable and affordable internet access at this point in our modern society is really critical economic development and community infrastructure. So it's no longer kind of a luxury commodity. It's really how folks access work, it's how they access education, it's how they access healthcare, et cetera. So, for our region in particular, our economy, we have a growing technology sector, a lot of gig workers, and then in our rural areas of the county, we often see a lack of available and affordable internet. And, that has impacts again on how folks access healthcare or education or their work. So this has also been driven by kind of a recent flood of federal funding from a number of sources that are kind of coming down the pike to support broadband infrastructure. It's like nothing we've seen in the last, I think, 20 years or so. And I think that's really on the tail end of the pandemic. We really saw firsthand how critical it is for folks to access, to have reliable and affordable internet access. So in order to kind of be able to take advantage of those opportunities, we came to the board just over a year ago, brought this opportunity, and the county asked us to lead this needs assessment process. So with that, I think I will pass it off to our consultant, Greg Ladman with Magellan Broadband.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity to share with you about the study and the results. Can everyone hear me okay and see my screen?
Yes.
Seems so.
So I just want to start with a little bit of background on the project. As Shelby noted, it's a very high level, comprehensive study, really looking at broadband opportunities and needs across the county. We wanted to, look at where the needs and opportunities were, of course, but then also identify prospective priority projects, and with input from the community and stakeholders, assess the feasibility of the solutions. As Shelby noted, there's some pretty substantial funding opportunities coming available, and there's also quite a few public-private partnership opportunities. And we also wanted to put it in the context of current and emerging standards for broadband. So I wanted to start out with just kind of a high-level overview of the supply side of the market there. In a lot of ways, Deschutes County and your communities are typical of what we see across the country, with kind of a duopoly that provides most services. The traditional telephone company, which in this case is CenturyLink, which is now part of Lumen Technologies. And then on the cable company side, TDS Telecom, which was formerly Ben Broadband. TDS purchased them a few years ago. And as I said, this is kind of typical of what we see in communities across the country. Typically, the telephone company, because of its history, has to provide service to everybody. But as far as broadband internet, there are some limitations with the technology that limits the coverage. And then typically with the cable companies, such as TDS Telecom, there'd be much more concentrated in urban areas. And then outside of that, we see quite a bit of activity as far as wireless internet service providers. You have several in the region that are serving more remote areas, but also targeted locations within your cities. And then the big three cellular companies are kind of wading into this marketplace with their fixed wireless access. To the extent that we could tell, T-Mobile is the only one that really has a clear presence in the county offering fixed wireless. But as I noted, you can have several smaller, locally based entrepreneurial companies providing fixed wireless. Of course, you have satellite. There's some just technical limitations to satellite. Those limitations are being pushed by Starlink and some other companies that are investing, but we still see issues with those, particularly as their subscriber base increases, performance decreases. That's just kind of the nature of the business. Then you also have a really good collection of enterprise network service providers, including Bentel, FatBeam, LS Networks. Blue Mountain Networks also has a pretty strong presence in the whole region, although it's as far as the enterprise services, I don't think they've got a strong presence in Deschutes counties in particular. Link Oregon is your statewide government network that's focused on education, particularly higher education, public schools, and then public agencies. Zayo is a major global provider that has presence in your area. And then Ziply is kind of a new age, so to speak, broadband company that's providing telephone service, but also broadband. They don't have a real strong presence in Deschutes, but they are in areas all around the county. So we thought it'd be important to note them. And then the other thing that I want to note about that's really interesting in your market is that you have a huge amount of long haul fiber running north-south through the county, essentially headed up to the Columbia River area, where there are multiple very large-scale data centers for companies like Amazon, Facebook, and Google. That's an asset to be aware of, but the simple fact of the matter is it's very much like a freeway that's passing through with no on-ramps or off-ramps, and accessing that fiber can be a major challenge. But it is definitely something to be aware of.
Can I ask a couple questions about the infrastructure connected to these services? So these enterprise network services, is that basically like fiber to the home or fiber to the business location?
Exactly. So they typically will not serve homes. They really focus on major enterprises. And the key thing that is the differentiator, other than just the cost is much greater, is that for these enterprise services, they are offering a guaranteed uptime. So they have a service level agreement, and they offer guaranteed bandwidth. And those two things make the services much more expensive and far out of reach of any residential or even small business company.
And then the fixed wireless providers, in terms of infrastructure, I mean, is that basically towers?
Exactly.
Like, various kinds of towers.
Yeah, and I'll touch on this a little bit later on, because we see this as especially a viable solution in your more remote rural areas. But yeah, with fixed wireless, you essentially have a tower, very much like a cellular tower. Matter of fact, T-Mobile, Verizon, and AT&T are really using their cell towers for these services. They're quite a bit different than your typical cellular because they're not mobile, so you can't move around with it. It has to be fixed, as the name implies. But also just because of the nature of the technology, the radio spectrum that they use for the service, it provides nominally very high speed connections in the hundreds of megabits. But there's a lot of caveats, as you might imagine. For one, it doesn't propagate very well. So trees and buildings will slow it down or stop it. And then also it's basically shared bandwidth. So if you have multiple subscribers on one cell, then they're all sharing that bandwidth. So with wireless, it's very much one of those things that it's good for flexibility. It's good for reaching areas that are difficult to serve otherwise. But really, fiber overall is preferable. And indeed, the fixed wireless services require fiber to the towers. So, it's radio from the tower into the home or business, but from the tower out to the rest of the world, it's fiber.
Got it. Thank you.
Of course. So one of the things to stress about this study and all studies like this is that there's a bit of a challenge with data. And I just want to show a couple of slides here to exemplify that. We really look for data from the FCC, from the Federal Communications Commission, and this data is provided by the providers themselves. They're required to report this data. And this map diagram kind of gives you an idea of what nominally the FCC shows at a high level for the county. Now, this is kind of gold standard, so to speak, for broadband with 1,000 megabits per second downstream to the subscriber. So that is what we call gigabit broadband, although in this case, the data would indicate that it's somewhat limited upload speeds of 100 megabits, but that should still be plenty for, even the most serious telecommuter, et cetera. So you can tell from the hexagons here kind of where the FCC believes the services are available based on data from the providers, right? So you can see that it looks like down in the South County, particularly around Sun River, Lapine, you've got a lot of this. You've got some in Bend, and you have some up around the Sisters area. And I want you to note in particular, this area kind of north of Sisters, if you can see where my arrow is, and kind of note that it indicates there's a lot of units served with these really pretty high bandwidth services. Now, what's interesting with these broadband maps is that as you zoom in, the picture changes substantially. So I want to show you a zoomed in version of kind of this area up here, showing where all that service is available. And what you see here are little green dots that indicate where addresses or premises where the providers say they are providing this relatively high bandwidth gigabit broadband. And you'll notice that just to the east along Wilt Road, I'm sorry, all the little red circles are residence premises without this service. Now you'll notice also that I've done this for a much lower speed, 100 megabits per second downstream and 20 megabits per second upstream. And I chose that because that is kind of the emerging standard for broadband. The current federal standard is still 25 megabits per second down, 3 megabits per second up. And really that is maybe adequate for checking email and doing a little bit of web surfing. But as far as video conferences like this, or for telecommuting, or even doing online education, telehealth, excuse me, it is totally not adequate. The 120 standard has been adopted by the state of California and the state of Washington, and has been recommended by an independent commission for the state of Oregon. So that's why I picked the 120, because it is kind of the emerging standard for what folks expect from a basic broadband connection. So the key point is that if you notice, kind of the disconnect between this basic definition of broadband and what the providers indicate is available with the green dots and where it's not available with the red circles versus what they said was the available as far as the gold standard in this same area. And so the fundamental issue here is that the data that we get through the FCC is not the most reliable and not the clearest. You know, this is coming from the providers themselves as far as what they say they offer, rather than what's clearly available. And, you know, and it's filtered down from the FCC. Now, in last couple of years, the state of Oregon contracted with a company that specializes in doing some data acquisition and surveys for their Faster Internet Oregon initiative. So this gives you a much better example, I think, of what the actual speeds out there are. Now, it has been noted by some of the telecom companies that, well, this represents what the subscribers have, not necessarily what's available. That, you know, there could be much faster services available, but people just don't subscribe to them because they don't want faster service or it's too expensive or whatever. But again, I think the interesting thing to note is the clustering of all the red and yellow dots in this area up above Sisters that we're just looking at. So the point is that, you know, we really kind of have to triangulate from different data sources to try to understand what's actually available. And so as we get into this and you decide on next steps, I think one of the key things is going to be to dive into a lot more detail and get a lot more input from community members about exactly what they have. But I think overall, this provides you a pretty good sense of where the needs are. And as you'll see, we really kind of focus in based on the data we were able to get and from feedback from your community stakeholders around this area north of Sisters, the area around Terrebonne, and the area kind of La Pine and south of La Pine for kind of priority projects. So we did extensive stakeholder input sessions in conjunction with the Broadband Action Team, which met on a regular basis. We met with multiple focus groups around economic development, education, et cetera. We also did a community session, unfortunately, very lightly attended. But then as we got into the priority projects, we also conducted focus groups on each of what I'll share with you here momentarily as our priority projects. So where did we focus? There's four general.
Before we go further, could you go back to that map with the red and green and yellow dots?
Yes, definitely.
I see the clusters that that you've highlighted north of Sisters in the Terrebonne area and south of La Pine, but
Yep.
yeah, I also see a whole lot of red dots in that cluster in Redmond and down south of Bend. Maybe that's in the Deschutes River Woods, or but can you explain why those aren't identified, you know, areas of concern or focus areas for us to be giving some attention to?
So yeah, that's a great question, and primarily because we were assured that those are actually areas where providers have a very strong presence. So they have the infrastructure in those areas and are actively offering fiber-based internet services, you know, from the information they provided us. And so we kind of concluded from that those are really areas where the issue is affordability or just consumer preference rather than lack of infrastructure and lack of available services.
That's very helpful to understand. Thank you.
But that being said, I think it is really important to think about affordability as an issue and to address that. And we do cover that in quite a bit of detail in the report itself. So as we kind of zoom in a little bit on some of these major gaps and priority areas. And again, I would not say that this is a totally exhaustive analysis of the gaps. There are undoubtedly other smaller gaps. For example, the Alfalfa area seemed to lack connectivity, but it was relatively more affluent than some of the other areas we looked at. And feedback from stakeholders and the focus groups were to focus more on the less affluent areas where felt that affordability and lack of infrastructure really combined to make it a real challenge. So as I mentioned, there's 4 kind of general projects, opportunities that we focused on to address some of your broadband gaps and opportunities. The first one is fiber to the premise. So this would involve building fiber optic network infrastructure and out into your communities, particularly in kind of the exurban or rural residential areas. Those seem to be the areas where the infrastructure just isn't there at this point. Another issue that we heard quite a bit about is that internet traffic that originates in Deschutes County and terminates in Deschutes County tends to get routed out of Deschutes County and through Portland and through other tier 1 internet exchanges. And it's just kind of the nature of the way the internet works. But this is can be a very substantial risk exposure, especially for emergency services. If there was a Cascadian seismic event and it took out Portland, basically, even if your area is minimally impacted, you would lose all of your internet connectivity. So having a way to keep the local internet traffic local could be a very beneficial thing. And then kind of similar to that is looking at what we would call middle mile fiber. So this isn't the long haul fiber that was mentioned earlier that comes north and south up to the big data centers with no way to access it. This is fiber that's much more accessible. It's not the thing that your typical resident or somebody would plug into, but it's what providers use to interconnect major sites and to provide local connectivity on infrastructure that connects via the middle mile. And in particular, we see a key opportunity to build a middle mile route between Bend and Salem. And then last but certainly not least, we looked at wireless broadband as a solution to reach some of your more remote rural areas, particularly in the East County area around Brothers and other parts of East County. So I'll just kind of step through each of these, and we had a number of considerations as we looked at the viability of these projects. So if the higher the technical requirements and associated costs, that was more kind of a barrier to the overall feasibility. Having linked projects, even if they were outside of the county, but especially where you had complementary opportunities in the county, that was a positive, a driver for the opportunity. Having options for governance and partnerships, that we saw as a positive aspect and something that would drive it as an opportunity. Impact on equitable access and affordability. Again, we saw this as a really important issue, so we really considered that as a driver and give it a priority. And then last, any kind of financial, legal, or regulatory issues or just overall complexity of it, that was kind of a negative consideration when we looked at these projects or prospective projects. So what I'm going to share with you here next is a map of the areas that we thought would be good focus areas for fiber to the premises. And so we're looking at a couple of things, areas lacking that 100/20 kind of emerging standard for broadband, and areas outlined in red are what we could approximately from FCC data tell seem to be underserved. And then the other important consideration, as I mentioned, was income. So we wanted to look at median household income for these areas as a percentage of the state. So we're really kind of focused on these darker purple gray areas where folks are making, 70, no more than 90% of the state median income for their households. So the area around Terrebonne, we see this is one of the major opportunity areas just because of the density in this area. And again, you'll note that the kind of the area we identified as underserved is solidly in Deschutes County, but overlaps with Crook and Johnson County. And the reason that this is important is because the providers, frankly, don't really care where the county lines are. They want to go where the customers are. So we feel that this area is potentially would be potentially most attractive to provide to private providers if they had some assistance or motivation, additional economic motivation for getting out and serving the area. Now, the key thing is that I should note is that the approximate area of underserved does not necessarily follow along roads or other geographic features. So one of the next steps is definitely to do a much more detailed consideration of where these locations are and how to best reach them. We generated some very initial cost estimates, and all that's in the report. But the next step would be to get more detailed with that and actively engage some private partners to look at what needs to be done to get them investing in the area. Mentioned the area north of Sisters. This again is just kind of an approximate area, but you can see there's pretty good density. All the little gray black dots represent premises. So there's a pretty substantial market in this area. And then last but certainly not least, in the Lapine and south of Lapine, now this overlaps somewhat into Klamath County, but I think you can see that there's a good bit, particularly west and southwest of Lapine, of premises that are minimally served in that area, and also relatively low income relative to the rest of the state. Any questions about this fiber to the premise opportunities before I move on to the next?
Oh, I do have a question for you. It's Commissioner Adair. A couple of years ago, we were shut down here in Deschutes County, and it was coming out of Tacoma, I believe. And you're saying, I'm not sure exactly what that issue was, but it was a problem for over a day, I believe. But you're saying that a lot of things here are routed through Portland. Do you remember, Nick, when that was shut down? What was that issue?
Yeah, I don't recall exactly what it was. There was a severed line or cable or
Right.
something that did shut it down. And I think it was, certainly for a full day. I don't recall the other details about that. I'm not sure if Whitney might recall. She does recall, which is great. Would you like to?
Whitney.
To deal with it firsthand.
Definitely. They said it was out of Tacoma. And I was thinking like, oh my gosh, and now you're saying things route through Portland.
Commissioner, for the record, Whitney Hale, Deputy County Administrator. Nick, I don't know that I remember much else beyond your, I was sort of nodding in affirmation to you that is also what I recall.
I saw your head shaking. Yes, yes, you
Right.
did know, but it was just an affirmation. Thank you.
Yeah, the two general issues you'll run into with these major outages is either a fiber cut, and that could be through a number of circumstances. Someone with a backhoe digging where they shouldn't be digging, or a seismic event, a wildfire. We saw some of this occur due to wildfires. But yeah, there's a number of reasons that fiber cuts could occur. And typically those are brief or relatively brief, because the way that these networks are architected, they're built to form rings. So fiber is cut in one location, the traffic basically wraps around the other side of the ring and just keeps on going. And that's kind of part of the challenge with Deschutes, is that for some of these, you're kind of off on the end of the line rather than on a part of the ring. And so that's part of the recommendation for the redundant fiber routes. And then, of course, the other outage is that if the traffic is going through a major data center or an internet exchange, and there's an equipment outage or a fire or something along those lines, that can put you out of business. And again, that's a great reason to keep as much local data, local traffic local as possible.
Can I just ask about these maps? There's
Yes.
I want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. So in both the around Terrebonne and north of Sisters maps, there's really some pretty dramatic median household income contrasts between census blocks. So you have one census block where people are well over median household income, and then you have another census block right next to it where people are significantly under. Is that correct?
It's from the census data. So, a couple of the census data is, of course, the best data we can get for this kind of information. But a couple of caveats is that this is relatively old. I mean, I think it was the 2020 census. It was when all this was updated, so it's a few years old. But the larger caveat is that they look at this on a block by block basis or block group by block group, so they're geographically aggregated. So particularly something like a median household income, that's going to represent all of the households in that geographic area. And it doesn't really say much about the distribution, so to speak. But because it's median, it suggests that the majority of the households in the area basically fall below the median. So it's it's a broad brush, but it's, I think, basically the tool we have at this point for kind of targeting and prioritizing projects and where you should pay attention for efforts to improve broadband development.
Right. One of the reasons I want to ask about this is kind of anticipating funding applications, or seeking some of those federal dollars. We've just had this experience trying to support the community of Terrebonne through financing their new wastewater system, where we were told, Terrebonne, the service area, the median household income is way too high for them to qualify for certain kinds of USDA rural development grant funds, things like that. But in your diagram here, I'm seeing that there's Terrebonne is basically split in it's parts of two census blocks. So if we have project areas that aren't all below median household income, but some is and some is above, how is that going to play out in terms of seeking some of this federal funding, or some of these investments for disadvantaged communities? Will they? I mean, if only part of your project area is disadvantaged, will you still get? Will you still get recognition, eligibility, bonus competition points and things like that for that, or does it really need to be your entire project area?
Yeah, that is a great question. So typically what we see with these grant programs, and with some of them kind of the rules are still being formulated, but particularly with the federal BEAD, broadband equity, and oh my gosh, my brain stopped working there. I forget what BEAD stands for. I apologize. But that is clearly focused on low income areas. So that would be what we would recommend there is a targeted proposal to really focus on those areas. And that's one of the kind of beauties of network infrastructure, if you will, is that it can be deployed in a very focused manner. And as a matter of fact, that's kind of what we've seen with the private sector is, they're for-profit businesses. So they target their deployments into areas with relatively high density of relatively affluent households and businesses, because that's where they can make the most money. So just from kind of a practical philosophical perspective, it makes sense to focus any public investment in areas where it really just doesn't make economic sense for the private sector to invest, to provide a bit of an incentive for them to make that investment. And then especially if you can achieve specific public priorities, such as access to educational opportunities, connecting public facilities, et cetera, that really enhances the proposal. So basically, you can focus your proposal in on those areas that really need the investment, and then look to the private sector to step up and say, yeah, we're going to invest along with the public sector to expand access, and we're going to focus our investment on those areas where there really isn't a need for any kind of support.
So, in this potential project area example that's up on our screen right now,
Right.
you could seek federal funds essentially for the darker shaded area, to
Right.
install infrastructure in that darker shaded area
Exactly.
specifically,
So to
and
the
then
west,
rely on a private capital investment to get the other side of Highway 97.
exactly. So basically what you'd work toward is an agreement with a private company that they are going to invest in this entire area. They're going to serve everyone. And then we're going to focus any public investments on the areas west of 97 and to the northern end of the area up along the county line. And then there could possibly very well be a collaboration with that's Crook County to the north, right? No,
That's
Johnson-
Jefferson County.
Jefferson County, I'm sorry.
And 90% of the people that live in Crooked River Ranch are in Jefferson County too.
Yeah. So that would be a great collaboration opportunity. And typically the funding opportunities do look for collaboration where you have multiple entities, in particular, multiple public jurisdictions working together. So a regional project will tend to get higher points, higher consideration than a local project.
Commissioner Adair, just to address your topic, your question, it was 3 years ago. And it was correct. We were going only north on one path with one provider. And since then, we have seeked another provider. And so now we have redundancy and we're not only going north, south.
So we're covered now in case that happens again. Thank you so much for that. Because I was thinking like, oh my gosh, how can, something in Tacoma really impact us in the middle of Oregon?
Yes, we're fortunate that we do now.
Okay, great. Thanks for that update. Sounds like that was a worthwhile addition.
It was an opportunity for us.
Yes, an opportunity. Thank you.
So just at a very high level, as far as fiber to the premise, kind of the way to assess it is, the technical requirements for a project like this and the cost, even for these focused areas, is going to be quite high. This will be tens of millions of dollars to deploy this infrastructure. But the linked projects, particularly into Jefferson, Crook, and Klamath counties, are quite good. The governance and partnership opportunities are relatively low. It's really going to almost have to be one of the incumbent providers, either CenturyLink or TDS, or possibly a third party that would be coming in and focusing on these areas. But it'd be relatively limited set of partners that you could look at to do this. On the other hand, it would have a big impact on affordability and access, and the regulatory, financial issues, legal issues are, there's significant, but not substantial. And this is all kind of stuff that we're typically used to dealing with, permitting and making sure that you have a certificate of public utility, et cetera, to carry out these projects. So that's relatively straightforward. And so really the key things here, the costs would be very substantial, but the impacts also would be very big. So keeping local traffic local, in a lot of ways, this has pretty much been addressed. You have a really good organization there in Deschutes County, the Central Oregon Internet Exchange, the COI. This is a great economic asset to you. We are seeing more and more that regional internet exchanges are really essential to economic competitiveness because of the way they handle internet traffic. So that's a great asset to you. They have done a great job of interconnecting a lot of assets and a lot of providers to keep your local traffic local. And specifically, they've gotten the Bentel data center, the Cascade Divide data center, and Lumen's central office in Bend, all interconnected via very high capacity fiber. So really all of the local regional network service providers are now participating in that. I think the last one that just joined was LS Networks. The holdouts, so to speak, are TDS, which is a major provider throughout the country, but especially in the Northwest and Midwest. And they also, through a subsidiary, own the Vault data center. So it would be really ideal to get the Vault data center connected and to work with TDS to do more local routing of traffic. And I think there's some major business opportunities with them. And then Lumen, CenturyLink, all of their traffic is routed through Portland just because of the nature of their network. So it's unlikely that Lumen would join in with the COI, but it's, I think, something to keep out there and encourage these companies to collaborate and participate on this. Because, essentially, if you've got a TDS broadband line and or a Lumen broadband line at this point, and something happens in Portland, your service could be completely out. So that is again, I think, an important consideration. Now, I should note that these are major companies that have huge infrastructure and very robust plans for any kind of incident. And I'm sure they can be glad to share with more details about. So the likelihood of something like that is relatively small, but in telecom, we're big believers in working for the 5 nines, as we say, of 9.99999 uptime to ensure that folks are always connected. So we feel that this is a really great project. It's very low technical requirements. In a lot of ways, it's almost pretty much all done thanks to the COI and their tireless efforts to get everybody connected. Lots of opportunities for linked projects, partnerships. There's kind of not direct impacts on affordability and access, but very important overall impacts and kind of behind the scenes. And then the financial, legal, regulatory considerations are very low. So we think that's a great project, relatively straightforward and already moving ahead, if not pretty much completed. Now, the complementary one to this is really interesting. This would be a redundant fiber route between Bend and Salem. There's several really interesting opportunities associated with this, just because of the number of partners, everyone from University of Oregon Hazard Lab, which has to track wildfires and seismic activities and other hazards throughout the region. They need fiber and they have funding to build it. Multiple providers would be interested in this route, including Ziply and all the cellular companies, because they want to provide better cellular coverage throughout the area. It would be a very expensive undertaking, but there's a lot of funding sources. And even though this doesn't really directly impact much of Deschutes County, it provides a lot of strong regional linkages. So technical requirements and costs, very high. Very little of this would be anything that Deschutes County or local stakeholders would need to worry about, though. Great opportunities as far as linkages with other projects and partnerships. Substantial impact on affordability and access, although admittedly primarily outside of Deschutes County. The financial, legal, regulatory issues are rather high because of the environmental issues, building in national forest and other protected areas. But again, I think part of the thing with this project specific to Deschutes County is this is something you might support and encourage, but not something that you would be kind of on the hook for, directly involved with, or need to consider funding. So the last kind of priority project we looked at was wireless access. It is relatively inexpensive and very effective for reaching remote areas. And the trade-off is that it's relatively low speed. It does require fiber for backhaul, as we say, to carry the data from the local aggregation point into a data center, into the core network. So fiber to the towers. There's many prospective partners and potential providers, kind of listed a lot of those earlier. It could be really important as an enabling technology for your ranchers and your farmers out in the East County. Agriculture is one of the most digitized industries out there. And even for small farmers, basically, if you can't get online, it makes it really difficult to procure materials and resources, to track production, to tap into markets. So it's really important to have online connectivity out in some of these remote areas. So just kind of very high level assessment of this, the technical requirements and costs are reasonably low, medium, I would say. You compare them to some of the big fiber projects, they're very insignificant. And really the main cost in a lot of this would be getting fiber out to towers that could then be used to provide the wireless services. They've got pretty good linkages with other projects, particularly in agriculture and economic development. There's a lot of good partnership opportunities and ways that the public sector can benefit and help make sure these projects are successful. They have pretty good access on impacts for access and affordability, admittedly in more sparsely populated areas, but still important areas that need to be connected. And then they have very low financial, legal, and regulatory requirements. So these types of projects, other than finding tower sites and getting fiber to them and having partners that would actually offer the services, are relatively straightforward projects. So our general recommendations moving forward, we have a whole variety of them. I'm just going to hit on a few and look forward to your questions and discussion. Generally, we really strongly encourage you to approach broadband development as economic development. It is critical for your local economy on so many levels, but also you can think of network service providers, internet service providers, as a targeted industry and recruit them and seek investment from them, just like you would really any other targeted industry. That said, it is as an economic development, the best thing you can have in economic development is a strong team with a strong leader. So we would very much encourage you to choose a lead agency for the county, for the region that can, herd all the cats and bring all the resources together and really help focus the investment where it's going to have the biggest impact. It's also, one of the things we noted is there doesn't seem to be a lot of geographic information system infrastructure. I know that the county has GIS, some of the cities have GIS, but it'd be very helpful to have a regional geographic information system to pull all this data together. It is a lot of data, and being able to analyze it is critical to everything from managing the assets to getting the funding. There's a lot of just simple policies that you can adopt. We really encourage local jurisdictions to be consistent in this. We especially heard from some of your major providers, TDS and CenturyLink, about some of the permitting challenges that they're facing with the cities of Bend and Redmond. So having consistent, rationalized local policies can really lower barriers to deployment. Beyond that, we really encourage you to just track everything from your public spending on telecom to where the infrastructure is being deployed, and really feed that into a planning process to have ongoing broadband development to meet your economic development goals, to serve the community, and probably just as importantly, to support the county and other local government operations. And as far as the action plan that we recommend coming out of this, assuming that you do some of those key things, particularly designating a lead agency, that I think COIC is just the prime opportunity for that they really have been great to work with and are very concerned with this and have great contacts at the local and state level. So once all that kind of is rolling, I think organizing a task force around each of the priorities, getting the key folks involved, getting the key stakeholders, particularly community members and those folks that are going to be served, and hearing from them about what their needs and opportunities are. It's going to be important to really define these areas in a lot more detail as far as the geography, what you're wanting to accomplish out of it. As you're looking for public funding and private investment, public funding, the funding agencies are going to want to know about the impact. And when you're looking for private investment, especially if there's any public funding involved, you want to be able to hold those private companies' feet to the fire and have them make specific commitments for the areas that they're going to serve, the prices that they're going to charge, their response time when something goes out. So having a really clear definition of the areas and the outcomes is going to help with both the number 4 and number 5 here, as far as finding public funding and attracting and managing private companies that invest in the area. Any additional questions or discussion at this point?
You have any questions?
I have a few, but go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
You don't want to go first?
No, go ahead.
The 4 priority projects that you described, they're pretty different in nature. I can imagine that the way that the partnerships organize around those projects might look different. B, one of the things I was concerned about is whether there's there is all this federal and state funding right now. I'm curious whether those would be equal. Or whether there's a pot for every priority project, or whether some are much more priority for federal and state funders right now than they might be on our end. So those are a couple of questions. What does the organization for each of these projects look like, and what are the federal and state funding opportunities?
Yeah, each of the kind of priority areas we identified, priority projects, are, as you noted, quite different, but they are also complementary to one another. And particularly, we look at fiber to the premise. The first and probably the biggest challenge, and the one that's going to get the most focus, having additional middle mile infrastructure, having local routing of local traffic, and even having wireless options for more remote areas are all complementary to the fiber to the premise. So, for example, with wireless options, what we typically oftentimes see, and it depends a lot on the company that's doing it, but leading with a wireless connectivity to get established in the market space and start providing some services. And then as the market matures, following along behind that with more fiber to the premise. So it becomes kind of a 1-2 punch, if you will. And then, of course, as you mentioned, the funding sources vary substantially. If you take, for example, the middle mile route between Bend and Salem, there are a number of funding possibilities there, including wildfire recovery funds, et cetera. And so those really have to be kind of cobbled together to make that work. But again, this is something that Deschutes County and whoever the lead agency is would have relatively little role in. So I really think balancing those out and kind of coordinating and seeking the best appropriate funding sources is kind of the real challenge here, maximizing the investment.
But there are federal and state funding sources for each of these different kinds of priority projects.
Yes, very much so. The only exception might be keeping local traffic local, but I think that requires almost no funding, very little.
Got it.
So my question is there a need for the middle mile routes to go east?
That is a great question. And yes, there is some major needs, opportunities for that. But the challenge is that it would have to essentially be a route from Boise to Bend.
That's exactly what I was thinking, but honestly, it might make some sense. And then if, you've got the circle on Terrebonne, but honestly, it needs to go into Jefferson County too, because Crooked River Roundup, I believe it's 7,000 people there.
Yep.
And as long as you're, concerned with a small area, you should actually do the entire area.
I agree. Yeah. And
there's a lot of people that live there. And then it's also the other thing I was thinking of is the people like from Christmas Valley. When you consider that whole area south of La Pine, why wouldn't you want to enable that entire area to have better service? I mean, as long as you're doing this, it seems like you should have a greater vision. I actually live with Yellowknife, and that service rarely goes out. Every once in a while, but it's pretty consistent as far as our experience goes.
Yes, I totally agree with you on all points. Yeah, a long haul, it'd really be a long haul route, but quote middle mile from Bend to Boise could be very valuable, but it'd be very, very costly, and there's relatively few communities in between that could be served by it. And so that's one of the reasons we didn't really make it much priority. And it's going not only out of county, but out of state. But that is definitely something we would encourage all the stakeholders to consider in the long term. And then your point about serving adjacent areas, you are totally correct. You know, having a provider partner and say, yeah, you want to get Yellowknife, a local small business, you want to get them investing. Sure, they want to serve Terrebonne, they want to serve the areas south of Lapine, but you know, they don't care too much about the county lines. They care about where their customers are and how they can serve them. So they want to serve as much as that area as possible. So they're definitely having partnerships with the adjacent counties and taking a very comprehensive view of the opportunity is very important.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Liebman.
I also wanted to ask if I was tracking you correctly a couple of minutes ago. I think you were saying that for some of the, these three specific areas where we want to eventually get fiber to the premises, it's almost like an intermediate first step to do wireless broadband solutions for a rural area. So you extend fiber a certain way, a certain distance, you get it to a tower, you start to do the wireless, and then over time you extend out the fiber from there. Is that?
It definitely could be. It really depends on the preferences of the company that's actually offering the services. So, you know, a TDS is unlikely to do that because they want to have all of their customers connected via wire and wire that they own. But if you were to partner with Yellowknife or one of the other fixed wireless service providers, even a T-Mobile or a Verizon, it would be much more appropriate there. Matter of fact, they might just deploy the infrastructure for a wireless service and not even worry about running fiber into the premises.
And I mean, that was, these three areas identified for fiber to the premises, type A priority projects. I was wondering why you wouldn't try to do those areas with the wireless broadband solutions. I was guessing, and then I guessed that, there's enough people there that eventually you would just kind of swamp the capacity that you have. I mean,
Yes.
Is that the reason why you are recommending those areas for a type A project instead of a type D project?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that go into it. One is just that fiber is kind of the gold standard as far as just high capacity, high reliability service. And it is admittedly the more expensive. So just kind of taking a conservative, so to speak, approach to estimating the cost of these projects, we wanted to go with looking at fiber. And because, there's a danger of kind of having two tiers of more rural areas that are just getting, wireless or something less capacious, and then dense urban areas getting fiber. That's really a policy decision of what you want to approach, but generally we feel that it shouldn't be a matter of where you live. It shouldn't be a matter of your zip code. You should have fiber-based services available to you. And then I think that just the last consideration with that is that the providers themselves have a lot of say in what they're going to provide and how they're going to provide it. But most of them are really aggressively going after fiber-based services for a number of reasons. But one, because the long-term return on that investment is very good.
Thank you.
Great.
It's like Scott has his hand up.
Scott. Good morning, Scott.
Good morning. Thank you. Scott Aycock, Community Economic Development Director at COIC. I just wanted to note on some of the earlier questions and comments that this notion of working with Jefferson County, Northern Klamath County, Crook County is appropriate is exactly what we were speaking to a few meetings ago here at BOCC to have COIC work with all three counties to submit it's another grant, but a regional application to the Broadband Technical Assistance Program. Because what that lets us do, that money would allow us, not just COIC, but all the partners, to shape up these projects from, right now everyone's on these high level needs assessment and kind of opportunities to, the next step, which is getting a lot more into the nitty gritty, finalizing geographies, solutions, partners, the pro forma, if you will, when you take in, external investment and weave it into private investment, can we move forward or not? So that's the kind of the whole intention of the next step. And as the focus geographically for the work that Magellan was doing and that we were doing was just Deschutes County. So we asked them not to go across the county lines, but Jefferson County did very similar work. And so we're working with them. Crook County did not do anything of this nature to this point, but they're aware of the opportunity and want to work together. So anyway, just acknowledging those edge issues and that there's still work to be done. We've identified needs and opportunities at a high level, but there's additional technical as well as project development work that has to happen to then be able to get that state and federal money. Fortunately, a lot of it's been held back for a while for these very reasons, for planning purposes, et cetera. So we still have time, plenty of time. So if, we can get into that in more detail if you like later, but I just wanted to note that there are lots of opportunities to keep shaping these up, work with the ISPs, work with the communities, other partners, yourselves, and then get projects submitted and funded in a fairly timely fashion.
Thank you for using those terms nitty gritty. I thought that was incredibly appropriate. So yes, I could relate to those terms.
That does set up my last question, which is, and this is for all of you, maybe especially for staff and for COIC staff, is what should the county be thinking about doing now that this assessment is complete? What are our next steps to continue support development of these projects?
Yeah, I'll just speak to the points that Scott brought up. It's really, looking at the opportunity to kind of fill the gap between, okay, we know what the high level needs are. We know that there are these federal investment opportunities, and some of those federal monies are actually coming down through the state Oregon broadband office. But there's some work that we need to do in between around partnerships and even some, design and engineering pieces. And, even some support for actually writing federal grants. Some of them can be a little heavy. And so that's really where we're focusing our energy. Again, there's this BTAP program coming through the state, which would support us in kind of being able to do that work. So really just being at the table, supporting that process, at least from my perspective, is where the county can help. And then, being engaged in the conversation as we move forward around what are the barriers once we get into the nitty gritty, as Scott was saying, helping us address those. And then I think Greg brought up a few sort of high level recommendations for the county, just tracking this, building this kind of structure into your planning processes, looking at capital projects as opportunities to say, is there an opportunity for us to also look at maybe some broadband projects in partnership with this, et cetera.
So do we have any deadline dates out there? Does the state say, yes, in 6 months, you need to have something in? What is the cut and dry of all this funding?
That's a great question, Commissioner Adair. Right now, we've heard different things because, the state is getting this input from folks like we need to be ready. We need to understand what our needs are. So their timelines have shifted a little bit. BTAP, our greatest understanding right now is that program will open at the end of this year, early next year. So we're really well positioned to take advantage of that opportunity. We're kind of just waiting at this point. We've got sort of the partners pulled together and interested. And now we're just waiting for them to publish their final rules and then open that program to apply. They also have a number of infrastructure programs that are opening through the state. That's BEAD. I think Greg spoke to that a little bit earlier. Broadband equity and access deployment, I believe is what that stands for. They have 5 million through the state for that. There's the digital equity program through the state. And then there's another one, 7.8 million for ARPA capital projects. And their timelines on that vary, but it looks like 2024 to 2025 is when those would be opening up. So again, as Scott noted, I think we're positioned really well to be able to have time to take advantage of those opportunities.
Okay, you're saying the state has 7.8 million of ARPA funding? Is that what you just said?
Yeah, for capital projects.
Okay, because that will have to be determined by the end of 24, done by 26, or the money perhaps would have to be sent back. So it seems like they need to move that deadline up.
Yeah, I think they're looking at opening that up soon after the BTAP program, but I'm not clear on the details for the state's process. So folks can certainly be tracking that through the Oregon Broadband Office. They send out regular email updates. They have a webpage on the Business Oregon website, I believe. So
Thanks, Shelby.
Yeah.
Thanks for all those details.
And did you say that there's some of this BTAP money to actually do some more of this planning work, the designs, partnerships?
that's exactly the purpose of BTAP. It's, to support staffing and capacity, some leadership to move this forward, design, engineering, capacity to just do some more planning and prep work to be prepared to take advantage of some of those future opportunities.
Great.
Good. Any other questions?
I mean, my last question, Terrebonne is one of the focus areas identified here. In terms of coordinating with existing capital projects, there is a very large capital project happening in Terrebonne in the next couple of years. I can't remember whether. So we were fortunate enough to be able to coordinate roads work with some of the wastewater system and what wastewater infrastructure system development through Terrebonne. And I am wondering whether they are throwing fiber conduit in the ground while they're doing that at the same time. And if they're not, then I'm wondering whether there's a little bit of coordination right now while they're digging up 11th Street could actually save somebody some money later.
Is that ODOT or is that, yeah?
It's ODOT.
It is ODOT, but Chris Doty and Cody Smith are keeping pretty close tabs on that. So that they might be any of those folks.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for the heads up on that. We'll certainly follow up.
Great.
And actually, I mean, the infrastructure is going all the way down 11th Street and then, the lower bridge, way intersection. So if there's real simple opportunities to throw a little bit of infrastructure in the ground, while
Just
all of that
head it
is
right out to Crooked River Ranch that way. So
or at least, get it across Highway 97.
great. Anything else? Thank you so much for joining us today. Okay, we have some very patient people in the room. Item number 10, Tanya, I believe.
That doesn't happen very often. There's not many Tanyas, so.
Oh, that's right. So sorry. Tanya, but it's spelled differently. It's spelled differently.
Tanya,
Yes.
record. Tanya Saltzman, Senior Planner, Community Development. And I'll keep this pretty quick. This is just meant as a brief check-in with the board to talk about Senate Bill 1013 and our plans to address that through some text amendments. I provided a brief memo to the board along with Senate Bill 1013 itself for your perusal. essentially, Senate Bill 13 was adopted in July of this year, and it becomes effective on January 1st. Essentially, this allows a county to allow an owner of a lot or parcel in a rural area to cite one RV, a recreational vehicle that's used for residential purposes and subject to a residential rental agreement, plus a bunch of additional criteria. So this will allow people to potentially, have RVs on their property that they rent out to people. So it's designed as a way to provide some additional housing in rural areas of the county. The bill uses the term rural area because it also deals with some kind of funky areas within UGBs, I believe, that don't apply to the county. But for our purposes, it's rural residential exception areas, very similar to the ADU bill. I will go through some of the selected criteria that's in this bill, and then some of the stuff that we're also considering beyond what's in the bill. In some ways, this does share some criteria and some similarities with Senate Bill 391, which allows for rural accessory dwelling units. The further we dig in, the more we realize, there's also some other stuff that is quite different. So we are lucky that the ADUs have come first and sort of forged that path because our planner, Kyle Collins, has trod that road, figuring out a lot of those details that will be helpful as we parse through the RV bill. And then there's just other elements that are very unique to RVs. So we're kind of working through all of this right now.
Can I say something first? Because it was brought up last night. I was outside the sisters meeting regarding discussion over that proposal in town, in Barkley. And someone said, is it possible that we can have like one RV at our place for a homeless family? Does this bill require that they have to pay rent every month, or do we just have to have an agreement? So when you're talking about things, if you can think about it from that perspective, somebody did bring it up and I thought it was an idea worth sharing.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And I'll just note that this would not apply to the cities. So if it is within the city of Sisters, that's a whole.
Right. No, but no, they were talking about it outside the cities.
Yeah. So I'll just kind of jump right to that, is one of the things that is a county may allow. So this is written into the bill. A county may require that they can basically limit the amount of rent that people charge to just expenses. So that you can say, we're not going to charge you $7,000. We're just going to charge you kind of what it costs us. The county can regulate that if they choose. That's a road that we haven't yet explored. It's kind of on the table because it's written into the bill. It's not a requirement. So I don't know if it could be free per se. It might have to have some nominal charge, and we can certainly explore that more. But there is a mechanism built in that you can sort of limit that amount that is charged through that residential rental agreement, which is really interesting. I think, the part of the purpose of the legislative intent of this is to provide for housing for people, that's ostensibly affordable. And that is one mechanism to do so. So we'll be exploring that further.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, and I think the key question I was going to ask, a similar question, is essentially, so read the part about essentially the county being able to cap the rent, but the question is on the flip side, which is, can you also make it so that you don't have to charge rent?
Yeah.
Just my initial thought on that is I'm okay with some people charging real rent, like a full rent, market rate rent for an RV space on their property. But it would be great if other people who are more interested in providing housing security for our disadvantaged neighbors were also able to just have a tenancy without charging a significant amount of money.
Right. Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And we'd have to dig further in, and that's what we're doing now, and kind of how that would actually happen, how that would be controlled and addressed. Right now, I can't say that I know how we would do that, but it's definitely on the table. I'm looking for the exact words. In the bill, it says, the county may require that the owner of the lot or parcel limits the amount of payments that the property owner may accept from the tenant to those reasonably necessary to cover the owner's costs or losses. So that might be subject to some level of interpretation. So we can kind of go down that road
Yeah.
as this process teases itself out. I'm going to just go through very briefly some of the highlights of things included in the bill. You seem you're already quite familiar with it appears, so I'll just keep it fairly brief. For the purposes of what we're looking at, it would, as I noted, apply in rural residential exception areas. So the same as the ADU bill. It would be RR 10, MUA 10, SR 2.5, and UAR 10, and potentially the West Side Transect. The property can't be in an urban reserve. There has to already be a single family dwelling on the property as the primary residence. There can't be any other dwelling units on the property. This is a big one. The RV cannot be utilized as a short-term rental. So that's very similar to the ADUs. It's not intended to be kind of Airbnb, VRBO type of things. The RV must be owned or leased by the tenant. And then another big one that we're kind of wrestling with the details of is the property owner has to provide essential services to the RV space. And the concept of essential services is defined in ORS 90.100. Essentially, it's sewage disposal, water supply, and electrical supply. So all of basically an RV hookup and some modification of that. We have our building division looking into what exactly that means. But the big point of that is there needs to be somewhere to deposit the waste. So it's not just, you can't just park your RV there and kind of dispose of the waste elsewhere. There has to be some mechanism there to do it. So that might be a significant investment for the property owner. And so we're working on figuring out how that would shake out within our code. Those are the main things that are in the bill itself. There's not a minimum acre size written in there like it is for ADUs. That's kind of a notable difference. And then those additional options. So one was already brought up about the limitations of the rent that's charged. We can require to register the use with the county. These are things, again, we're going to kind of work on. Enter into a written residential rental agreement with the tenant. So to us, that's some sort of lease agreement. We would have to work on how that's actually verified and documented. Does it have to be for a certain amount of time? These are all kind of variables we're playing with. And then the last one is require that the RV comply with any reasonable appearance, repair, inspection, or siting standards adopted by the county. And again, this is something that we're tossing around. Reasonable appearance can be a sticky wicket, especially in the face of clear and objective standards coming down the road. So we're going to have to figure out what that means, what it doesn't mean. That should be an interesting one. So those are all sort of variables that are put out there by the bill itself. In discussion with staff across our various divisions of community development, we have a few other things that we're thinking about. One of which, so snow load. Most of these RVs, especially older ones, are not necessarily designed to handle significant snow loads. So should we require a ramada or a shelter type thing that's put over this RV? And if so, what might those standards be? Should the property owner have to provide some sort of storage? We're trying to keep issues of compatibility in mind. So do we regulate where people's stuff can be? It's a very open question at the time. We might look into requiring some sort of storage provided either, as a separate standalone structure, perhaps part of the ramada or shelter, or if the property owner says, I officially am letting you have some of my garage or something. So do they have to require that? Should there be a minimum acreage requirement? Because there are some issues of septic and wastewater disposal. This has gone through discussion for the ADUs as well. There are certain areas that present complications when trying to house additional septic capacity. Should there be any sort of special setbacks, again, for compatibility issues? Are we thinking about fire at all? So unlike the ADU bill, there's not all of the wildfire considerations. That was obviously a huge chunk of Senate Bill 391. This bill doesn't talk about that. Do we want to address that in some way? Whether that's with some sort of setback or other, or just these are things that we're considering. Those are kind of the main things that we are loading around as we develop the amendments right now. which leads me into the timeline. So we're looking right now at a first hearing before the Planning Commission on November 9th. And that would make us have to give 35-day notice to DLCD on October 5th. So in about a month, basically. So in that time, we're coordinating across our divisions and writing up draft code and draft findings. We know that it's very similar to ADUs. A lot of these questions are going to start out a little vague, a little unanswered, and the whole purpose of the public process before the Planning Commission, as well as the board, is to figure out, where these things might want to go. Do people want us to require storage, for instance, or that sort of thing? So we're going to leave some of these things a little bit open-ended at the beginning and hope to tease out preferred directions through that whole process. With that November 9th hearing, there's potential to get before the board, possibly, depending on how it goes, in December. If not, then hopefully shortly thereafter, depending on schedules and things like that. So we're at a fairly brisk pace. We do want to be mindful of the ADU process that's going on right now, that's almost wrapping up. That process is definitely very complicated in its implementation. So it's one thing to have the code, but figuring out how it actually works when someone comes up to the planning counter and says, one ADU, please. There's a lot of things that have to be checked and verified, and what we want to require of the customers, of the property owners. So we're keeping an eye on that process to apply any lessons learned from that into RVs, so we don't have to kind of circle back and start from scratch again. So we are being very mindful of that process because they do share similarities in that sense. So that's our general plan. We're working hard on those amendments, and we'll be reporting back to the board as the process emerges. But November 9th is our goal for our Planning Commission hearing. So that's my quick overview. I'm happy to answer any questions. Any thoughts of issues or questions or things that you might want us to look at, of course, are welcome as well.
So anywhere does it say that they're drivable?
Yes, they have to be. There's a definition provided. Recreational vehicle means a recreational vehicle that has not been rendered structurally immobile and is titled with the Department of Transportation.
Okay, so, but there's no, can it be 20 years old?
It doesn't say. I'm not sure how the titling process works, if there's any limitations built in there, but you have to be able to drive it away.
Okay.
That's the main thing.
And does it have to have a motor inside it? Or, I mean, is a trailer, a trailer type camper with a hitch, that can be towed away?
Not considered that. But someone might know better than I do, but I believe it has to be kind of a self-contained, you can drive it away. That's my understanding, as a one piece.
Because there was,
Unless I'm wrong.
I feel like it was a couple of months ago, there was a young woman who came in here and was talking about the tiny home that she had. And it sure seems to me like it doesn't, it doesn't make sense to me that you couldn't have two parts disconnected and have it qualify. Here's my truck, here's my tiny house. Instead of just having it all be one unit with a motor and a steering wheel in it. But so I would love to get kind of a real clear answer on that.
Will, do you have thoughts on that? I noticed.
I seem to recall. Hello, good
Sorry.
morning. Will Groves, your planning manager. I seem to recall that fifth wheels were included in that. So things that don't have their own motor and could be towed by a separate vehicle were included in that definition.
And that's titled by the Department of
Transportation.
So as long as it's got a hitch and a
license plate
and wheels. Okay.
Yeah.
And a license.
Definitely make it very clear
Okay.
when we do it, what is eligible and what's
Yeah.
not. Yeah, tiny homes.
And I mean, does, so many people have vans these days. I mean, someone with a van, I mean, that you wouldn't have problems from the perspective of, operable, movable, has a license plate on it, but, if someone has a van, for example, they might have, they might be able to hook up to water. They might be able to, hook up to electricity, but they don't, they're not going to be able to, I'm curious how it will work. The wastewater disposal requirement is going to work here, because I mean there are all kinds of RVs that have a bathroom, but then there's they have a holding tank inside there. It's not like not like they have a wastewater treatment system on board, and how you get that can either connected to the homes, the residences septic system, or whether you can, it sounds like you are not able to just
Hold on to it.
go somewhere else on a regular basis and dump your.
Yeah, the way it's written, it says that this is where it gets kind of murky. Essential services include some sort of sewage disposal. Does that mean you have to use it? I don't know, but it has to be provided. So presumably there is some sort of connection to the septic system, and we have Todd Cleveland looking into that. But yeah, I mean, that's a really good question.
I mean, what if there's an arrangement with the property owner that you use the bathroom in the shop,
Right.
And you don't have anything on your RV? I mean, is that would that scenario, and you would put that into the tenant agreement or whatever you have set up, but would that be adequate provision of wastewater services to allow someone to park an RV that doesn't have any kind of a wastewater system in it?
That's a good question. I don't know if
Yeah, all good questions. It says that, that the space shall be provided essential services. In terms of the vehicle types, it says that, that it has to be a recreational vehicle titled by the Department of Transportation. I don't know if, for example, some of these converted vans or sometimes not converted vans would qualify for
Right,
those
I think
purposes. So
titled differently.
so those are good questions.
Oh, titled as an RV.
Yes.
Okay.
So then my question is, if it has to be owned, or the vehicle has to be owned or leased by the tenant, could the property owner actually own the vehicle and then lease it to the tenant?
I believe so. I believe that's part of the residential rental agreement. So,
Right.
I have my house, I have my RV, and I rent it out just like I would rent out
But it couldn't be
ADU.
short term. It has to be longer.
It can't be a vacation rental, so it has to be greater. It's either 30 or 45 days.
30 or 45?
I forget what the standard is that we're using, but 45. Yeah, so there's a lot of kind of wiggle room that we're exploring. For sure.
Yeah. And I had a couple of questions about, okay, I think I'm tracking what the rules are related to the Senate Bill 1013, but I don't actually know what the base rules are for people's properties before Senate Bill or HB 1013. For example, if you own an undeveloped property, doesn't have a dwelling on it yet, are you allowed to, you, the property owner, are you allowed to bring your RV and stay there?
I can answer that one. So you're allowed on a property that isn't residentially developed to be on the property for either any 30 days and any 60-day period. So, you could be out there, say you owned a wetland property in South County and you came occasionally for vacation use. No permits are required for that, provided you're not, engaged in some sort of development of the property at the same time. There's also what we call a 6 out of 12 permit, or a 6-month out of 12 permit. So you can come and this was originally designed for predominantly Arizona snowbirds, who spend half the year here and half the year in Arizona. And so you can be on your property in an RV for 6 months out of the year with a permit.
Okay.
But those are and that's all specific to properties that aren't residentially developed.
So you can do 30 out of 60 days without a permit.
Correct.
Just as the property owner, and then 6 out of 12 months with a permit.
Yes.
Then my other question was about trying to dig into this whole short-term rental issue. As somebody who uses Airbnb, for example, well, when I travel sometimes, you see RVs advertised on Airbnb all the time, and so I'm curious whether we don't have a short-term rental program at the county yet, where people would have to register, get a permit, and all that stuff. and I know that we're finally now tracking kind of, comparing Airbnb advertisements to whether people are actually paying us property, a transient room tax. But do we have any idea whether, as we are monitoring Airbnb and VRBO, all these sites, do we have any idea whether there are actually people who are offering, RV air short-term rental opportunities in the unincorporated county right now? And I mean, is that not allowed?
It's an interesting question. Our code, when written, didn't contemplate specifically these uses, and to date, these have kind of fallen into code compliance issues. And if you read the code in these sections, it says a single recreational vehicle can be used for these purposes. So to date, planning has understood it that you couldn't have a rotating set of recreational vehicles. So, something, you wouldn't get a 6-month out of 12 permit, for example, for a recreational vehicle and then change out which recreational vehicle it was every night. We've indicated that that does not appear to be allowed by the code, but we're using code that was designed for a different time. We have run into situations where people have put their property up on Hip Camp, where they've made either their entire or portions of their property available as a single space RV campground. And we've let them know that the code does not accommodate that at this time.
Okay. But in this gray area right now, if someone owns an RV and is advertising it as a short-term rental on their property, that's not specifically disallowed.
We understand it to not be allowed by the code. It's ambiguous. Okay. Some of the reasons that, in addition to just the kind of the letter of the code suggesting that it's not intended to be allowed, there were some significant concerns that came up in coordination with environmental, with our on-site wastewater division, as well as the health, as well as building, that these structures aren't designed for that type of occupancy. They don't have the egress that you'd expect from, an overnight lodging structure. They don't have the structural integrity or the fire safety that you would expect from these types of structures. So there were some significant concerns about opening up broadly, small campgrounds across the county, or using these structures as overnight. So I think to your question specifically is, let's say I have a house, I have an RV. Can I rent that RV out on a nightly basis to guests? No, okay, that's not currently allowed. That could be something that, as we explore this process and you see kind of the boundaries of where that's allowed, we could talk about a subsequent project to explore where we have latitude under the state system, and with input from our other divisions, including environmental health, about where it might be prudent or consider something worthy of consideration to allow those types of options.
And we don't know, I guess that would be a question for the finance office. We don't know whether they're artificial intelligence that's monitoring whether people are paying their short-term, their transient room tax is checking to see whether people are advertising RVs as short-term rentals out in the unincorporated county. I mean, can we flag that to ask Robert?
Yeah, we certainly can. I don't know that we are utilizing the software, but CDD reviews TRT proposals from finance where we are collecting them. So CDD is involved in that process today. Now, the others that we don't know would be on a complaint basis. But Peter may have more information.
Yeah, just to follow up, Peter Gutowski, Community Development Director. My understanding is the finance department is only authorizing transient lodging taxes in the registration of that program for single-family dwellings that are lawfully established. So anything that would relate to an RV, of course, from the finance department standpoint, and certainly in coordination with CDD, that would not be something that would be authorized.
Right. But are we checking, or is it just complaint driven?
No, I believe that the finance department, again, someone wants to participate in the transient lodging program, it has to be a single family dwelling, and a single family dwelling that's not located on farm or forest zone properties. So that is that screening, is my understanding, is occurring through finance. To the extent that there are questions that come up regarding any nuances, they would coordinate with CDD.
Right. No, well, I guess what I'm asking whether we're checking is, I believe we are checking whether there are Airbnb listings or short-term rental listings that aren't paying transient room tax. So I, kind of like a secondary, thing to check there would be, are they using the appropriate dwelling, or housing unit for, for a short-term rental. So, I'd be particularly concerned about the ones who aren't paying transient room tax and catching those people.
I can certainly follow up with finance on that question.
Okay. And that would go broader than just are people who aren't paying transient room tax, are they advertising RVs, and like any kind of like an unauthorized ADU, for example. I would like us to make sure that there's not a whole lot of unauthorized uses going on out there that people are making a lot of money off of.
If I can just ask one question, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the threshold questions for the boards that's going to have to consider in this process is how permissive or how restrictive do we want to be? Because you can be very permissive, and as you look at the options, the additional criteria to allow it to have a minimal review, to give the department a lot of discretion on utilizing the bathroom in an accessory building. There can be a lot of discretion to the department, a minimal review if we really want to encourage and allow these. The flip side is we can be very restrictive, which means it's going to really, we're going to address all the issues that you have here. And so that's going to be really the overarching umbrella. And I see heads nodding in agreement. That's going to be the real question. And there's no question. We know, and this is Deschutes County, you're going to have strong opinions on both sides. Some people aren't going to want to see them. Other people are going to take the opportunity, and they realize and recognize the need for housing of any type. And this is one of those mechanisms. So just to keep that in mind as we go forward, is that a lot of different opinions, and the key is going to be how permissive or how restrictive to be.
There's also another provision that could be made available that staff is contemplating as a starting point for the amendments. Is there a renewal? So after for example, conceptually, 5-year period, and if the 5-year period shows, again, confirmation that the owner of the residence lives on the site, that there haven't been any complaints, essentially that they've been a good neighbor, there could be a process where the renewal is very it's an expedited process. Conversely, if there were experiences of problems with the RV, noise, whatever, then that renewal process could may not be just a formality, that it could require an additional analysis, or it could be deemed not eligible for renewal. So it's another factor that ultimately staff will be looking for board direction. Again, I don't think we're looking for this input today. It's more that there's a menu of items that warrant consideration. I think our staff wants to maybe start with a comprehensive list and provisions that maybe align more with kind of how rural ADUs were executed. That's a process that, the board would offer, that it's a development action. It doesn't require any discretion. So it would be less expensive. And if you meet all the requisite criteria, you can get your permit and be on your way to design and implement a rural ADU. Our thought was the board would be interested in the similar level of review, knowing that housing is of great importance. So long-winded, that I think we would, unless the board has strong opinions, wants us to come back to provide further input, we will do the best job we can to build an amendment package that aligns with rural ADUs, that can go through a public process, and when ultimately it gets to the Board of County Commissioners, you can, after the public hearing, can provide guidance on what seems relevant, what doesn't, the level of review you want, how comprehensive the level of analysis is. So more than anything, this is just an opportunity, I think, to let you know that there's a lot to unpack here, and staff is in a position to take an amendment package that has all of these elements well vetted, so that the public process can generate meaningful input that ultimately allows the board to make an informed decision.
When you see that the request was from Clackamas County, which is a double population of Deschutes County. Definitely, they don't have the rural land that we have, but we definitely have a major housing shortage. And I just feel like if we can give people an opportunity to utilize this in order to help their fellow, whatever friend, neighbor that needs housing, I think it's really critical at this point in time. So, I'm really happy that it actually made it through the legislature. And as soon as we can implement it, I think it's important. It really may be a big help out there with our ADUs, of course.
Yeah, it's another option. It's a slightly different path than ADUs, but it's another kind of thing that's a little bit off the traditional options. When I started working on the ADUs before Kyle took it over, we had a lot of calls from people who, it's for their family members even, it's their aging parents or their kid in college or who just left college or whatever. So that kind of situation, this could be an opportunity for, just like ADUs. So it's another menu option. So
it just could be a little faster to implement and less expensive. And do we not need that in today's world? We do have winter here. They don't particularly have winter in Clackamas County, but we have winter. So, it sounds like perhaps next year.
We're working on it.
Yeah, I similarly, I would say the opportunity to provide more housing opportunities, kind of like not just more housing opportunities, but like a wider range of housing options for people, I think is an extremely high priority. And I'm going to be a stickler about this short-term rental, these aspects, because I really believe that we need more housing opportunities and we don't need more short-term rentals. But I'll be a stickler there, but on a lot of other dimensions of this, I would like to see us be as flexible as possible. We were just talking about, well, you can cap the rent that you're charging people, but we don't know yet whether you can, not charge rent at all. Like whether on the other end of the spectrum, you can not have a constraint. And I would love to see us not have a constraint on that other end of the spectrum. Some of the other questions that you've raised so far, I was finding myself leaning, towards the more flexible, permissive end of things. You can imagine a lot of scenarios where people don't need storage. They've got a $60 a month 5x5 storage unit somewhere, or their family that lives over in the Willamette Valley, they leave all the stuff there and they just need space for their vehicle. The snow load, I mean, you could imagine just saying, look, that needs to be part of your tenant agreement, that you have some kind of plan for sweeping snow off the roof of your vehicle. But we're not going to make you build a separate roof to protect your RV, things like that. So I would like to see us offer a as simple and as flexible as possible of a process as we can, while being mindful of very important public safety and public health considerations. That the wastewater thing is a real question. Like definitely wouldn't want anyone to be disposing of wastewater in improper ways, but can you do it through having access to a bathroom in the shop? Can you do it through like a porta potty, that is regularly serviced? Are there ways of meeting the intent of the legislation without without making this essentially an option that nobody can use?
Yeah, and I just think it's going to be important to put on record, the department has been obligated to communicate some of the regulatory requirements as pertains to homeless, to Juniper Ridge. And I just think it's going to be important to put on the record that the building division will have concerns about snow loads. These RVs are not built for permanent occupancy. So not to diminish your remarks about landlord tenant agreement, but I think it's going to be important for us to at least recommend a Ramada for that public safety, and the same thing for onsite. Having an approved area, whether it's the existing septic system, presuming that it can accommodate those waste loads, is going to be important to put on the record. Now, whether there's an opportunity to use the existing bathroom or septic system the existing bathroom in the existing dwelling, that may be a possibility, but I don't think having a porta potty is something that is references or recognizes a permanent solution, and it's not something that I think our on-site wastewater division team will support. And so, as your director for CDD, it's going to be important to put that on the record.
Just one other comment. I think whatever the board chooses to do in terms of the regulations, the next question would be, is this something you would really want to promote and let people know about? Because you can imagine how many you drive through any rural residential area now and you see RVs on the side of the house, in the back of the house, and in a Ramada, in a carport, wherever it may be. People might not be thinking about this, and then if we promote it, hey, gosh, I didn't realize. Oh, hey, let's pull the RV out and we can utilize this for this purpose, that people aren't thinking about it. And then that can even be a stepping stone for folks that aren't ready to build a rural accessory dwelling unit, that they choose to do so in the future. Because my understanding is you can't have both, but you could have one, and this could be a step in that direction. But just as a temporary housing option.
The wastewater piece is, like rural ADUs, is going to be a significant conversation. And ultimately, if it's determined that they need to rely on the existing system, RVs, their waste stream can be higher concentration. So ensuring that the existing septic system is in a position to handle that additional load will be something that we will discuss during the public hearing process. But there's
protecting protecting the environment, protecting groundwater quality, is extremely important to me. At the same time, I do want to point out that there might be, we could see a lot of, single property owner activity, you're making a relationship with a single RV owner or a single tenant relationship. We could also see this kind of opportunity utilized by organizations who are trying to provide housing, transitional housing, shelter opportunities to people. And I think, if someone came to me and said, hey, we think we can get, we think we can set up 8 safe, basically single safe parking sites in a neighborhood, near Redmond. Could we have a porta potty at each one and set up a contract for somebody to go and service those? I wouldn't want to preclude that.
Yeah, I'll just respectfully say that the safe parking for the homeless may offer that opportunity, but I'm not confident that that opportunity exists under this legislation in rural residential areas. So I say it respectfully.
Yeah.
The how one handles the on-site wastewater load is a significant issue in ensuring that there's a permanent solution and that wastewater can be handled is going to be critical. So a conversation to come. I just, as your director for CDD, we find ourselves in, we are regulators of the state building and on-site wastewater codes, and ultimately that can put us in a position to responsibly articulate that you need to have a safe, permanent location for handling wastewater. And I think that's likely going to come into play for this legislation as well. Again, to the extent that the owner of the property wants to offer their bathroom 24/7, and that's written into the code, that might be an opportunity, but I'm not confident that having temporary porta potties or a pump station is part of this legislation, and something that I know on-site wastewater division has real concerns about as a long-term solution.
So the contract for service is not an option, or it is an option that you just want us to, the board to be aware? It is not an option.
It's not an option as I read Senate Bill 1013.
Okay, but that might be something we want to get clarification from DEQ on.
Yeah, for sure. And just as kind of a practitioner, we certainly run into a lot of code compliance cases with RVs. And I would say that one of the primary things that you run into is I'll call disorderly management of wastewater. As somebody who has stayed in an RV on a property, I may have engaged in some disorderly management of wastewater. There's a lot of incentives to do that in that scenario. And if you don't have a permanent solution, things don't get done the right way.
Staff recognizes that providing housing opportunities to meet the needs of our entire constituency is incredibly important, and thinking creatively and innovatively within the context of the law is something that we want to support and explore. So I'm not trying to diminish this conversation at all, but it certainly will be a topic that, like it came up for rural ADUs, I think it'll come up as part of these amendment packages. But just wanted to get this information out up front, and to the extent that that has a limiting factor, then the board ultimately can figure out what is permissible under the law and what is not.
Yeah, I definitely would like us to get legal clarification on this. I'd also like us to be mindful of seeing the forest for the trees. I know I met tons of 20-somethings who work in town during the day and then go drive out into the forest to sleep at night in their vehicle. And I can tell you that they are not disposing of their wastewater in a way that is better than a regularly serviced porta potty. So, the net impact of us being very stringent about this might be that we are being very compliant with the legislation, but the net impact may be worse for groundwater quality and environmental protection in our community.
And I do remember the state of California bought a lot of small trailers for homeless habitat, and then they ran into that issue with how do you clean them out? And I believe they were just sitting there in parking lots. So it's going to be challenging in order to figure that out. And then on a simpler note, are RVs required to have a smoke detector? Are they?
Mine does.
It does. Okay, Nick, you're covered.
Newer ones may, whether or not they're operational with batteries and whatnot. And I presume that most have them, but whether or not it's a regular feature, I mean, we can certainly explore that if that question comes up, but the models and the modernization of RVs, I think, has improved over time. And we all know that there are RVs that are still roadworthy that are decades old.
Definitely. Okay, so you have a lot of
We have a lot of.
challenging things to work on.
Yeah, but we have a good amount of time, but we're still moving forward at a relatively rapid pace. So yeah, all of these things will be addressed in the public process.
And again, I think the approach, unless the board feels differently, is let's put everything out there. Let's make it robust, not to the extent that we want to make this overly complicated or bureaucratic. But as Nick pointed out, we need to do an excellent job of getting the message out that this amendment is going to be initiated. We need public feedback, and we may anecdotally hear a number of strong opinions and that elevate certain elements over others. But ultimately, we want the board to be making informed decisions, and it'll start with the planning commission and hopefully, I think, a very robust public process. So thank you for allowing us, and thank you to the two commissioners for offering some of these remarks and perspectives. And the team will integrate those accordingly. And like I said, start a public process with a hearing that'll occur in early November with the planning commission.
Thanks to staff for doing the detailed homework for the county on this. It is a great opportunity, and it is going to be complex to implement.
Oh, and I do want to congratulate Amy Doherty on 5 years with Deschutes County. So great. Thanks, Peter, for your leadership too.
Thank you.
And Tanya with a Y. Thank you for being here this morning. Oh, and an A, yes, well.
Some people, there's lots of variables. Thanks.
Okay, any other items?
I already mentioned the Public Health Advisory Board presentation yesterday. I actually think that would be really valuable to have Matt Christensen provide that same presentation to the board. It was very complimentary to the presentation that we had about when we were trying to determine what kind of opioid essentially opioid interruption strategies we wanted to invest in the next few years. And Matt Christensen's presentation was much broader. It looked statewide and kind of put Deschutes County in context. And it also addressed not just opioids, but stimulants as well. So that was one thing. And I wanted to mention that I had a discussion with the Gales brothers last week about this idea of supporting their supporting them in furthering this concept of using their property as some kind of shelter, transitional housing opportunity. And they would be very excited to have the county do some of the work or provide some of the resources needed to get them through the process of a rezoning from EFU to rural residential 10. And I just want to say again that I believe that it is a reasonable thing for us to absorb some of that, some of those costs and some of the risk associated with that. If they are offering up their property for a public purpose that is highly beneficial to us, they're not doing that so that they're not seeking the rezone so that they can develop their property and put put more dwellings on them on it and sell that. They are exploring all of this for the specific purpose of providing shelter or transitional housing opportunities in our community. And we don't, this is, especially with just two of us here today, this isn't I'm not asking us to open up deliberations and make a decision on that again, but that would wait for Commissioner DeBonne to come back. But I wanted to just mention that I had that discussion, and I really don't think it's appropriate for us to ask them to absorb the cost and the risk of that rezone process if they are pursuing the rezone for something that we need, not necessarily that they need.
Okay. And I did talk to Craig Gales, and he was going to make some phone calls regarding a soil study and connecting with some attorneys in the neighborhood. So you're right, it has to come back to the full board. I think that's important. Any other points of view today? Anyone else? Nick, do you have anything to add?
I do not.
Except that you are going to the Colorado game. I want you all to know that Nick is going to be there. So yes, that's gonna be incredibly interesting. Anything else? Do we have legal, or do we have any executive today?
We do.
Oh, we do. I don't have anything for it. Okay, so there's Miss Christie. All right, so Eric, do you want to sign off then so we can go to exec?